Hello, everyone. There's an abandoned classroom in a school. Locked, dark, with mysterious whispers coming from inside. No one dares approach it, but one student decides to enter the room at midnight. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Would you step inside that classroom? Tonight, we're uncovering the terrifying secret hidden inside a school's abandoned classroom. Are you ready? Subscribe and turn on notifications. In the oldest wing of our school, there was an abandoned classroom, room 3B. According to official records, such a classroom didn't exist, but everyone knew it was there. Its door was always locked, and its windows were covered with a strange black substance. However, whenever you walked past it, whispers could be heard from inside. At first, I thought it was just an urban legend. My friends always warned me, never go to that corridor at night, and if you hear the whispers, don't ever respond. But I was never one to believe in such things. So one night, I decided to stay at school and uncover the truth. I stayed at school late to finish my library project. As he was leaving, the security guard gave me a sideways glance and said, "Try to leave early. Don't linger too long." I smiled and nodded, but I already had a plan in mind. Once everyone was gone, I started walking through the hallways. At night, the school took on a completely different atmosphere. The classrooms were dark, the dim lights flickered, and every step I took echoed on the stone floor. Finally, I reached the infamous corridor where that classroom was. Room 3B stood before me. Its rusty metal number, seemingly scratched by hand, trembled slightly. As I stood in front of the door, I heard the whispers from inside. They were real. I couldn't tell how many voices there were. The sounds were so muffled and strange. At times, it sounded like a child's voice, and at other times, like an old man speaking. But the most terrifying part was that I couldn't distinguish the words. It was as if multiple languages were being spoken at the same time. Just as I was about to step back, the door suddenly started rattling. Should I go inside? Would you have opened the door and stepped in if you were me? A part of me was telling me to run. But another part of me wanted to uncover the truth behind this mystery. I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, ice cold. Taking a deep breath, I slowly pushed the door open. The door creaked as it swung inward. Inside, it was completely dark. But, strangely, as I stepped in, I could sense the presence of old wooden desks and a blackboard. The sharp scent of dust filled my nose. I took another step forward. With a loud bang, the door slammed shut behind me. What are you doing here? Can they hear us? I narrowed my eyes and walked toward the blackboard. There, a large sentence was carved into it. If you don't respond, you will be saved. A sudden wave of fear rose inside me. The whispers had turned into screams. They were so loud that my head was pounding. Help us! You can't get out of here. Don't close your eyes. I took a step back. Just then, one of the desks moved. Something was crawling between the desks. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence. My legs started to tremble. I ran toward the door, but it was locked. When I turned around, the shadows on the walls were coming toward me. At the last moment, I remembered the carving on the blackboard. If you don't respond, you will be saved. I gathered all my courage, gritted my teeth, and decided not to respond to anything. The whispers continued, but I simply closed my eyes and covered my ears. Despite the fear inside me, I didn't move. And suddenly, everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the classroom seemed abandoned again. The shadows were gone. As I approached the door, it was now open. I ran out and escaped the school with all my strength. The next day, I came to school as if nothing had happened. I went to the door of room 3B. But where the door should have been, there was only a wall. It was as if the classroom had never existed. But since that day, sometimes, while walking through the school corridors, I hear whispers of my name. Room 3B was still there. And once I stepped inside, they would never forget me. Oak Ridge High School had always seemed like a normal school, but those who had been there long enough knew about the forgotten hallway. It was a passageway in the older part of the school, sealed off decades ago after a tragedy no one dared to speak of. The school administration denied its existence, but students whispered about strange noises and flickering lights near the blocked-off corridor. David, Emily, and Josh had always been skeptical of ghost stories. They were the kind of students who laughed at horror movies and dared each other to spend nights in abandoned buildings. So, when they overheard a substitute teacher mumbling about the hallway that doesn't exist, their curiosity got the best of them. That Friday, after the final bell rang and the hallways emptied, they stayed behind. With the janitor distracted and the security cameras mostly outdated, sneaking toward the old part of the school was easier than expected. The air changed as they walked through the dimly lit hallways. Something felt off. The usual hum of school lights was gone. The closer they got, the quieter it became, until all they could hear was their own breathing. Finally, they reached an old wooden door covered in dust. It shouldn't have been there. They exchanged nervous glances. "Are we really doing this?" Emily whispered. "Too late to back out now," Josh said, forcing a grin. He reached out and turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway stretching into darkness. The air inside was ice-cold, thick with the scent of mold and something metallic. Something like blood. David hesitated before stepping inside, his phone flashlight barely piercing the shadows. The walls were lined with rusted lockers, their doors slightly ajar as if someone had been rummaging through them. At the far end of the hallway was a single classroom door, the number barely visible under years of grime, room 913. "That's impossible," Emily murmured. "Our school doesn't have a room 913. Josh stepped forward, reaching for the handle. The moment his fingers touched it, every locker slammed shut at once. Emily screamed. David grabbed Josh's arm. "We need to go. Now." But the door to room 913 slowly creaked open on its own. Inside, the room was frozen in time. Desks were still in place, though covered in dust. Faded textbooks lay open as if students had just left moments ago. But there was something else. Scratched into the blackboard in jagged letters were the words, "Don't forget me." A faint whisper filled the air, echoing around them. Josh turned, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could answer, the door slammed shut behind them. Emily ran to open it, but it wouldn't budge. David fumbled for his phone, only to find that the screen was filled with static. The whispers grew louder, forming words they couldn't understand. And then, the desks began to move. One by one, they scraped across the floor, forming a circle around them. Shadows flickered along the walls, twisting unnaturally. Then, a desk at the center of the room toppled over, revealing something underneath. A book. An old, tattered yearbook. Josh picked it up with trembling hands, flipping through the pages. The photos were normal at first, students laughing, teachers smiling, but as he neared the last pages, the faces started to change. Smiles melted into blank expressions. Eyes turned hollow. On the very last page, there was a photo of a classroom. Room 913. In the center of the image was a girl with long, dark hair covering her face. Her hands were pressed against the camera lens, as if she had been trapped inside the photograph. And then, she moved. The whispering turned into a scream. The lights exploded, plunging them into darkness. The room shook as if the walls themselves were alive. The chalkboard screeched as new words etched themselves into it. "You should have left." David yanked at the door with all his strength. It finally gave way, and the three of them stumbled out, sprinting down the dark hallway. The door to room 913 slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. When they finally reached the main hallway, everything was normal again. The air was warm, the school lights buzzed softly. But when they turned around, the door to the forgotten hallway was gone, as if it had never been there at all. From that day on, they never spoke about what happened. But sometimes, in the middle of class, David would glance at the windows and see his reflection. And standing behind him was the girl from the photograph. A group of students decided to film a video in the abandoned old school building on the last day of school. 4 years, No one had dared to step inside the old building. The school administration had locked it up and put up no entry signs on the walls. But the young students, driven by curiosity, secretly managed to unlock the doors and enter. They turned on their phones and started recording the night. "All right, let's spend a night in the old school," they shouted. But little did they know, they wouldn't leave the school without experiencing something that night. The building had been abandoned for years, giving it the appearance of a forgotten place. As they walked through the corridors, they noticed the door of an old classroom. The number on the door read 106. The door was slightly ajar, and strangely, it seemed like no one had ever been there. They exchanged glances, took a deep breath, and then, with courage, stepped inside. The classroom seemed unchanged. Worn-out desks, faded maps, and chalkboard writings that had nearly erased with time. But something was missing. The air felt heavy, a coldness lingered, as if time itself had stopped. Everything was abandoned, yet something seemed like it could move at any moment. At that moment, they noticed something on the wall. A message carved into the chalkboard, "Don't forget me." After so many years of abandonment, the presence of such a message made them suspicious. Unfortunately, they were not alone in the room. Suddenly, the door slammed shut on its own. The room began to darken. At that moment, a strange message appeared on their phone screens: "Closed eyes always come back." A gust of wind blew, and the murmurs from the walls grew louder. The students, trembling with fear, continued recording with their phones as something they hadn't noticed before appeared on the screen. A dark silhouette entered the room. The silhouette was slowly approaching. It had no eyes, only a dark void. As the silhouette approached, one student closed their eyes for a moment and opened them again. But something had changed. The room had grown much darker. When they opened their eyes, they realized everything had changed strangely and rapidly. Faces of former students began to appear in every corner of the classroom. But these faces were hollow-eyed, watching them, yet their eyes were closed. One student dropped their phone. The others began to panic, but the door to the classroom wouldn't open. It was locked. The silhouette continued watching them. The students huddled together, but one of them screamed. The others' phone screens began to show something else. So close now, the eyes trapped inside the classroom were watching them. On the screen, as the students frantically tried to open the door, the words, "You didn't see me," suddenly appeared. At that moment, their phone screens began to shake. The phones in their hands were almost disappearing, and everything inside had darkened. These eyes were planting a deep fear within them. Then, the classroom door slammed open with a final loud crash. But as they stepped outside, despite walking through the rest of the school, there was something on their phone screens, and in the video, each of their faces was trapped somewhere inside the old school. The screen began to tremble, and the words suddenly changed, "You didn't see me." And when they saw that message and opened their eyes, they noticed something. They were still recording. But the video they were watching showed them trapped once again inside that classroom. And there was no way out of the screen.